Hi everyone, this is Mr. Zoeller, and I'm here to present a screencast video today on the differences between the North and the South. So we're going to be focusing on the advantages and disadvantages of both sides at the beginning of the Civil War. So here's our learning objective we have. So students, you should be able to compare the strengths and weaknesses of the North and the South at the start of the Civil War. So looking at the population here of the United States, you can see that here in the northern part of the United States, so from Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, that there is a lot more people in the north. There are about 22 million people living in the northern states versus about 9 million in the southern states. And of those 9 million, those are also counting the slaves that are down there. And the reason why the North, of course, has such a huge population by 1860 is, remember, the economy and all the immigration going into the North, and that's why they have so many more people. So you have 22 million people versus 9 million means you can have a much larger army on the North versus the South. And let's go ahead and watch this video. So as you can see, the North is going to have a huge advantage when it also comes to its economy, towards its manufacturing that's going on. And so all these places that have been producing clothing and producing tools are now going to be producing weapons and munitions and supplies that all the soldiers are going to need in the Civil War. And so we're going to have factories transitioning from making like pitchforks, now they're making swords. We're going to have factories making firearms, making bullets, and we're going to have new inventions that are going to be created during this war effort, as we'll find out later in another video. And
in the South.
So railroads are going to play a huge role when it comes to transportation for the North. All of the major cities are connected from one to the other. It means you can load soldiers in one city and get them to the front where the war is going on very, very quickly, and the troops don't have to march there, so they're not tired and exhausted by that. And more importantly, you're going to be able to get supplies to the soldiers. That's always a big factor in a war, is yes, your army can move forward, but they need to be able to have supplies. They need to be able to have food. They need to be able to have water. They need to be able to have the clothing that they need, the weapons that they need. And so as long as you can keep that supply going, you can keep the war effort going. And so the railroads are going to directly connect all of the factories, all of the resources, the population of the North, and focus it into whatever area of the South that the Union wants to fight. And so looking at another advantage here for the North, here's some of the railroad tracks over here, all the coal production. So coal is going to be used for the steam engines, and also going to be used for making iron and other things later. We'll also have lumber, so all the different mining and lumber and resources in the North. And since most of their agriculture crops are based on food crops, that means they can also keep their troops well supplied. So the Union Army is going to have the best supplied troops. They're going to be the best fed. They're going to be the most rested. However, we'll find out that's not always an advantage when it comes to a war. And the telegraph is also going to play a huge role when it comes to communication during the American Civil War. This is a way that President Lincoln can send troops to generals all across the country, and he can find out instantaneously what has happened instead of waiting a couple of weeks to find out the results of a battle and then making that a big delay between what should the army do after that. So let's go ahead and watch this video here about the telegraph. Advantages and disadvantages of the North. So for the North overall, they have about 22 million people versus the South only has about 9 million. They have over 22,000 miles of railroads connecting all the major cities. They have a more developed economy based on manufacturing, banking system, money. So it's the United States of America. So it's the American money system, so it's still the dollar. And for the manufacturing, for every one factory that's in the South, there are going to be 10 in the North. So that means that out of the entire country before the Civil War, the northern states had 90% of all the manufacturing of the United States, which is going to mean that they can mass produce everything that the soldiers are going to need, while for the South, they're not going to have that as an advantage. For the disadvantage for the North, since the southern states are in rebellion and have declared themselves their own country, that means in order for the Union, the United States, to win this war, they have to invade and occupy the entire South. And that is going to be a huge effort and a lot of amount of land. So Southerners, all they have to do is defend their land. Northerners have to invade. And the top leaders that were in the United States military and the Army right before the Civil War, most of them are from the southern states, and so they're going to join with their state and fight against the Union. So the North lost a lot of very capable and veteran officers and soldiers, and that's going to be one of the advantages that the South has. So looking at some of the disadvantages for the South, one has to do with, all right, you're your own country, so how are people going to have money? You're not going to be using dollar bills from the United States anymore. And so the Confederacy is going to attempt to try to create their own money, and every single state, so kind of reminiscing back to the Articles of Confederation, is going to be creating their own type of money. So here's some example of some money that's created here in Virginia. And here's some more money that you can look at. And then even down below here at this bottom portion we're going to have, this is from Montgomery, Alabama, so state money from Alabama. And then here's from Jacksonville, from Jackson, Mississippi here. So each state's going to create their own money, and that's going to create a crisis of how much is one state's money versus another, since they're printing on paper, and what are they backing up that paper with, what's it worth, and that's going to be a big issue in the South during the Civil War. And then here's some more money you could take a look at. So Alabama, and with Tennessee, and then of course can't leave out Texas, and so $50 here in the state of Texas. Georgia. So each you just wanted you to see that every single state is creating their own type of money, and that's going to cause some problems later on. So one of the big advantages for the South at the beginning of this war is going to be their military leadership, and that their army, many of them have fought in previous wars, and they're veterans, so they know how to fight, they know how to follow orders, and they're better trained than the Northern Army. And so we'll have the head of the Confederate Army in the end from the state of Virginia is going to be Robert E. Lee right here. And in a previous video, remember mentioning Colonel Robert E. Lee, who led the Marines in to stop John Brown's raid in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. So he's going to be the head commander of the Confederate forces. So the Confederacy is going to have the best military minds at the beginning of this war, better trained soldiers at the beginning of this war, and those are going to be their major advantages that they have. So let's take a look at the Southern advantages and disadvantages. For their advantages, they have stronger military tradition with many of the best soldiers and officers in the U.S. Army coming from the South. And then to win this war, that means the South only has to hold their territory to win. They do not have to invade the North. They do not need to conquer the United States. All they have to do is protect their borders and allow themselves to be their own country. And so if the South ended up winning, if they won the Civil War, then that means if it was today, we would have two separate countries. We would have the Confederate States of America, which would be those southern states, those 13 states that seceded, and then we would have the United States of America, which would be the other states that are in the United States at that time. And so that's what kind of the world would look like today. Perhaps, we don't know, because that's not what ends up happening, spoilers, but we would have had two separate countries because of that. And then for the disadvantage, so the South has a lot of disadvantages. So when it comes to the number of troops, 9 million people in the South, that's including the slaves, which the Southerners aren't going to be using quite yet to try to fight for them during this war, versus 22 million in the North. There are about 9 million railroad tracks, miles of railroad tracks in the South, and they're not even all connected, versus the 22 to 25 million in the North. They had to print their own money, which led to some problems. Their economy is based on agriculture, so cash crops, growing cotton. I mean, you could pick your cotton, throw it at the enemy. It's not going to hurt very much, so cotton balls aren't going to work well. So if this is going to be a long war, that means the South needs to be able to transport their cotton and trade it with another country for manufacturing, for weapons, for supplies. And so during the Civil War, we'll find out that the South, the Confederacy, is going to look to try to make Great Britain their ally and let the British Navy come in and help them and let the British manufacture everything. And then for manufacturing, the South does have some manufacturing, but they only have one factory for every 10 in the North. So the North can mass produce all the items that they're going to need for this war. All right, so I want you to go ahead and pause the video and answer questions number 1 4 down below.